Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our presentation this afternoon on Every Budget is a Referendum about your library. I'm Jamie Machek with the Nicolet Federated Library System, and I'm glad you are all listening in. We have John. John, how do you say your last name?
It's good. All right, John Kraska.
Kraska. There we go. He is the executive director for Every Library, which is based in Chicago. John has been a longtime library trustee, supporter, and advocate. He is the current president of the Board of Trustees for the Berwyn Public Library in Illinois and is a former president of the Reaching Across Illinois Library System's multi-type library system. So some of you might have heard of Every Library, and I'm sure John will talk a little bit about it. But it is the first national political action committee for libraries dedicated to helping communities plan and win ballot measures like bonds, levies, and other referendum that renew or extend library funding. So we're having some tech issues with John. For some reason, he can't pull up the screen or his slides up on the screen. So I'm going to be advancing the slides for him, which means I really can't be watching the chat box. So if questions are coming through, I'm not ignoring you. It just means I can't really focus on that. So we're going to focus on questions either halfway or at the very end, and I think that will work just fine. So if you hear John saying, please advance, that's me advancing the slide. So, hey, we'll do whatever we have to do to make it work. So John, whenever you are ready, just go right ahead.
Jamie, I appreciate this, and I appreciate the the tech issues that we're going through today. I'm very excited to be talking with you folks from Nicolet Federated Library System. It's an important opportunity for us to talk in a little different way about everyday advocacy. The everyday advocacy that we do is focused, of course, on budgets. Where does our money come from? City government, county government, appropriations through our boards of trustees. There's a lot of different tools that political action committees and political campaigns use to bring candidates before the voters and to talk about the issues that matter. I want to use some of those examples for you today and talk very specifically about ways that you can operationalize a slightly new form of advocacy. I'm going to go through and ask a couple of questions of us about what really matters in terms of how we begin our advocacy discussions. But I want to start with this, with an overview of who we are as an organization. For those of you who know us, I appreciate that. For those of you who don't, I want to talk a little bit about how we fit into the advocacy ecosystem. So if you go to the next page. Every library is founded on a fact. There's a fact that libraries, as political entities, you can't spend your own money doing political campaigns. For about 40% of the libraries in this country, they have to go out occasionally for voter approval of different measures. It might be a bond or a levy or a millage, but they can only expend certain kinds of money on information-only campaigns to get that done. Also, our advocacy ecosystem includes friends, groups, and foundations and other nonprofits that are capped in the amount of spending that they can do in support of a campaign. Every library is built in a way that's a little bit different than that and is set up in order to help talk to voters directly. Next slide, please. We're set up as a 501c4. A 501c4 is different than a 501c3. The associations out in the space, Wisconsin Library Association, American Library Association, OCLC, the Gates Foundation for that matter, are set up as 501c3s, which means that they're charitable or educational associations. We're set up as a C4, which means we're a super PAC for libraries. It's the first time we've ever had a super PAC for libraries. Dewey's been dead for a long time. And so we're trying to put a focus on the bonds and referendums and levies and millages that affect our ability to function as libraries with solid tax support. We also occasionally work as an organization on legislation that affects libraries' ability to act as a district. So some states do and some states don't have the ability to go out for direct voter approval, or if there's a situation like in California right now where there's going to possibly be a measure coming before the voters statewide about the way library districts are set up, we do work occasionally in state governments. But our primary focus is on those local library ballot initiatives that affect our basic funding formula. Next one. We're set up to do two things. One is to work with libraries on information-only campaigns. That's the time when you've got on public time in the public trust, have to talk to voters about what you're going to do if this measure passes. So we work on pre-planning and polling for the library, technical assistance with those kind of campaigns, and then really the timing issues in the public trust. Next. Oh, sorry, we skipped one. Jamie, you're my hero today. We work with, if we can move one more. Okay, well, that's quite all right. I'll tell you about what else we do. We also work with Vote Yes committees. So when a local community has something before the voters, we spend time working with a group of citizens and advocates who've set up an organization that works specifically on the campaign. They're not friends, they're not foundations, they're not volunteers within the library, they're not staff. They're a group of citizens who want to see the library receive the funding it needs. So we do a lot of activity with them as well. Last year, we worked on 7 campaigns. We helped secure $15.1 million in public funding at the ballot box. For every dollar that we spent as a political action committee, we returned $1,450 to the public, to the public libraries that we worked with. We won 5, we lost 2. We've learned a lot, and we're moving towards working with about 21 campaigns this year coming up in 2014. Everything that we're doing is based on data. It's based on data that comes not from the library sciences, but from the political sciences. It's based on data about what motivates voters around library measures. A lot of what we're talking about today comes either from Awareness to Funding, which is an OCLC publication from 2008, was really absolutely foundational to our work, as well as a little bit from Pew. So next slide says, nationwide, and this comes from OCLC, nationwide, 37% of the American voting public, we're not talking about users, we're talking about voters, 37% of the American voting public would definitely vote yes for a library initiative. 37% will probably vote yes for a library initiative. The first 37, the definites, come from a perspective that says the library is part of the public good and should be supported whether or not I'm a user. The other 37%, when they're confronted with something on the ballot at the ballot box, need to be talked about, need to be talked with about what that measure is going to do for the community. 37 plus 37 does not automatically equal 74% of voter approval. We have to do these campaigns in an active way. Out in the voting public, 26% of the voting public will probably or definitely vote no, or may vote either way, meaning that there's a cadre of people out there who are not into taxes. They are not necessarily into the idea of the public library. There's a few different reasons for that. Everyday Advocacy says we should talk to them about it. On Election Day, we really want to focus on bringing out voters. Next slide, please. When we look at other voter attitudes, according to Pew, and as well as Harris Interactive, which ALA has commissioned at different points, these numbers look great. These numbers look fantastic. 94% of parents say libraries are very important to their children. 79% say, 94% are important. 79% say very important. The 58% of Americans have a library card. 62% of cardholders is visited, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We tend to rely in this business, in this industry, in this profession, on inbound service. When 58% of Americans have a library card and 62% of those cardholders have visited the library at least once in the last year, have they ever talked to us? Have they come in and just done a cash and carry kind of approach, a little bit of a retail moment? That's where our concern comes in, because of the people who come into the library, have they had a valid experience and an engaged experience with a modern librarian or library worker? If I use the word librarian throughout the rest of this presentation, don't hold me to the fact that it's somebody with an MLS, because the public doesn't care if you've got an MLS or not, and I respect it very much. But when we're talking about everyday advocacy, the person who's behind the desk or at the service point or at that special event is the librarian to them. With these kind of numbers as a baseline of support, though, we've got great places to go and a heck of an opportunity for candidacy. Next, please. But, there's a but. Your funders, who in many cases are elected officials, And in every case, when you're talking to somebody in Madison, your funders listen to voters. Your funders, of course, listen to postcard campaigns and that kind of stuff, but when you get right down to it, their constituents are people who vote for them. When only 7% of our likely voters say they will definitely support libraries at the ballot box, we have a lot of work to do. Next, please. There's a big question for us. There's a big question for libraries. What is going to activate those 37% of definite yes voters, and what will sway those other 37% of probable yes voters? To ask that question as professionals, to ask that question as people who work in public service, well, that's the rest of our time today together. Next slide, please. Sorry about the bullet points there, but library use does not matter. This goes back to the OCLC data set from awareness to funding. It's a brilliant piece of work. I highly encourage anybody who's engaged in advocacy work to spend some time reading it. The voters' willingness to support increased funding is not driven by or limited by library use. It's not an opinion, that's in the data. Statistically significant survey of American voters. What do you believe about library funding? How do you behave about library funding? The fact that they're a library user does not matter. What this says is that the person who's not been to the library since they were 14 years old, the person who might be 24, 34, 84 years old right now, who's not been to the library for a long time, still may have a tendency to vote yes for the library or to become an advocate for the library because they believe in it as, well, we're going to talk about that in just a second. Next, please. Again, from awareness to funding, OCLC's work on this matter. The library is not perceived as just a provider of practical answers and information. We're in a great spot because the most committed supporters of libraries hold a belief that the library is a transformational force. The word belief there is not casually used in this sentence. There's a conviction on the part of people who are voters, yes voters for libraries, and advocates for libraries. There's a belief in a transformational force, and you all work in institutions that are transformational forces in your community. As we move forward into thinking about ways to advocate, how do we tell those stories about being a transformational force in our communities? Next slide, please. The factors that determine a resident's willingness to increase their taxes. Okay, the willingness to increase their taxes. This might be at the ballot box, this might be at city council or county government, this might be a regular levy lift that the board of trustees has to do, this might be a general obligation bond that gets floated in Madison. However it goes, they have a willingness, voters have a willingness to increase their taxes to support their local library. It's based on their perception and attitudes about the library, which we hear about all the time in the advocacy work that we get, all the advocacy seminars that we do, all the advocacy trainings that we do. But the key thing in this data set, the From Awareness to Funding data set, is that it also is about their perception and attitude of the librarian. And again, it's MLS or not, clerk page, backroom tech services, person you meet at a cocktail party who happens to work in a library, that perception of the librarian matters a great deal to voters. The idea that the library is a transformative force means that librarians, so people who work at libraries, are transformational agents. The fact that there is a belief about this means that we need to put ourselves out in front to demonstrate ongoing relevance, but we've got a great place to start from. That is about their attitude and not their demographics. This also means rich or poor, conservative, progressive, et cetera, et cetera. Voters have a willingness to increase their taxes to support their library because they perceive and have an attitude about the library and the librarian. That's very positive. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to talk for a minute about who these people are, who are potentially probable or super supporters of libraries, either at the ballot box or as advocates. The way they manifest their advocacy is different and nuanced because you've got 364 days to do advocacy work, and you've got one election day. So what I'm going to be talking about here more is about the 364 days of regular advocacy. But what activates them as supporters? Next, please. There are several shared values and beliefs across different segments of the voting public. Again, it's about values. It's about who we are. How do we believe the world should be ordered? How do we believe things should go in society? Who we should be as a country activates people for the library. Next, please. There's a lot on this slide. You're all going to get the slides after this thing's over. But these are the key characteristics, the 5 key characteristics of people who are probable or super supporters. Real quick, involved in their communities. Communities does not necessarily mean civic. It could be church, synagogue, mosque. It could be a group of quilters who make booties for babies who are premature. You know, it doesn't really matter as long as there is a tendency towards community. They recognize the library's importance to the community and to child's education. Great, check. We do that all the time. We stand in all kinds of gaps about education. We stand in all kinds of gaps about the community. We need to tell that story in a much more active voice. I love this one. They are not always heavy users of the library. You know, the person who hasn't been there since they were 14, the person who comes in occasionally and just does stuff for their kids, the person who is, oh yeah, I got a library card, let me find it, oh, it's at home. They still believe that the library is a noble place that is important and relevant to their communities. The fact that the library can be looked at as a vital community resource along the same continuum as public schools and fire and police, public works, public safety, etc., and that they are willing to increase their taxes because of all the aforementioned things is reinforced then by the last one. And if you want to hit the next slide. They recognize the value of a passionate librarian as a true advocate for lifelong learning. This came out of surveys. This came out of statistically significant samples of the American voting public. This came out of focus groups. The idea of the passionate librarian, somebody who's engaged in the community, somebody who's engaged in particular populations, whether it's immigrants or children or the aged or the business development community or the arts or personal enrichment and discovery, the true advocate. You guys are true advocates. I know the work that you do. I haven't been to every library that is up in your service area. I don't need to because I read the news. I've looked ahead. The chance for us to tell this story about being a passionate librarian and an advocate for the community is absolutely key. Next, please. To recap, about people who are voters for libraries and also as advocates for libraries, there is no substantive difference between somebody who's a user and a non-user. The person who believes that the library should exist to help those people, even though they themselves don't use it, are still activatable for the library. We see this a lot in funding situations where you got these big donors who come in who don't necessarily use the library because, quite frankly, they buy everything that they need. But they still believe in the institution because it helps somebody other than them. We need to talk about that. On the conservative versus progressive continuum, there's no difference. And we can use the homeschooler as an example of this. The person who comes in, the mom who comes in, looking for materials for her kids, looking for a place to do programming, looking for adult interaction and contact, looking for something that extends her ability to teach, could be from the hippie collective or could be from the home church movement in town. It doesn't matter. Now, whether or not she's going to vote for you, the same way a user or non-user is going to vote for you, we've got to talk to them. Whether they're going to advocate for you or not, we've got to talk to them. The only community that's significant in terms of its how attitude affects its ability to advocate are people who believe that any tax is a bad tax. We need to pay attention to them as a community, as a profession, as an industry, because libraries are potentially a soft underbelly of where government can be shrunk. I could do a whole webinar on just this, but I want to flag it for you. When it gets right down to it, nothing impacts the behavior of a voter or an advocate more than their perception of you and where you work. Okay. Next one, please. So let's talk about, from the political sciences, what advocates voters. There's a number, what activates voters? What's going to actually have them come out and punch a Chad? What are they actually going to do when it comes to, like, even maybe helping to move the candidate forward? Stuff like weather and access to the polls, we don't have an ability to do that in many library campaigns. We're not going to bus people in. What we do is go back to the top of the list, which is to give them a reason to vote. And in a vote yes environment where there's a citizen committee involved in the success of that library measure, we make sure they're mobilized. Somebody's actually gone out and asked them to vote. Skipping down a little bit to trust in government, libraries score very, very high on trust in government issues, which is great for us when it comes to saying that my vote matters. That's a real key driver in a lot of ways for what activates a voter. The two most significant things for what activates voters for libraries is those people who have a culture or habit or tradition of voting, people who have voted in every election, like myself, since Dukakis versus Bush. We vote regardless all the way down the ballot. If the first time that we've read something about what the bond request is or the levy lift looks like or the parcel tax happens to be, is when we're actually in the ballot box, we're going to be in trouble as a library community floating that initiative. We've got to talk to them as well. But the biggest driver, the thing that differentiates campaigns like President Obama's and Governor Romney's, was the personal contact with the candidate or the issue. Sometimes that is done through social media and advertising, but it is done most effectively through knocking on a door, through literally getting out and doing the canvas. If we were in person, I'd do a nice dramatic knock on something wooden. But that's that moment where you say, hi, I'm John. I'm with the XYZ campaign, and I want to tell you about my candidate. My candidate believes these different things. Would you vote for my candidate? Is a massive driver. In the Obama versus Romney campaign, it was the difference in certain precincts that tipped certain states, that tipped the Electoral College towards an electoral victory for President Obama. Governor Romney's campaign lacked that. There's a lot of different studies, and there's a lot of different proofs out there about how having someone, whether you're the mayor and you're going door to door, or the alderman going door to door, or the water reclamation district person going door to door, makes a key difference in winning those elections. And us, in library settings, having a group of volunteers, having a group of citizens go out on behalf of the librarian, because we are in some ways held back by the information-only campaign, but to put the candidate out in front of voters makes all the difference in the world. Next slide, please. When there is a campaign in place, quick campaign checklist. This is high level. This is not necessarily how I would do it if we sat down together and talked about running a bond initiative for your library, but competency here. You have your allies as part of your campaign. You have your campaign coalition, which means you're getting endorsed by individuals or organizations outside of your own candidacy. You look at what's going to be coming against you, and you spend time either neutralizing it or working against it actively. There's something called a ground game that we do as candidates that needs to be active and well planned, which again puts people out in front of voters and talks to likely voters in a way that says, here's what we're about, here's what we're doing. There's always a plan in a campaign for both earned media, which means the good coverage that you get from the editorial board or some special events that you're doing that you get your picture in the paper, and ways to influence social. Social media is of paramount importance. The biggest thing the campaign does to activate voters is to put the candidate in front of them, or if the candidate is not available because we're talking about a presidency, or if the candidate is unable to make as many door knocks as one human being possibly could, their representative. Putting the representative of the candidate in front of the voters matters a great, great deal. Next one, please. When we're talking, again, about voters and libraries, because nothing impacts voter behavior more than their perception of you and where you work, and again, for campaigns, if there's something on the ballot, what really has to happen is that, well, if you do the next slide, that we have to talk about ourselves as the candidate. We have to talk about us as the candidate. Those of us who work in libraries, those of us who are volunteers at the library when the Friends and Foundation perspective, the librarian is the candidate because of all the things that were aforementioned. The idea that you work in a transformational place, the idea that you are the transformational agent in that community means that you are the candidate. The activation of the belief that people have in the validity and efficacy of the institution, that means that you are the candidate. When we look at what in a political campaign environment happens with incumbency, I want to remove the library itself as an institution from the candidacy and focus on the fact that there's an incumbent record, meaning that there's a record that says if we have a levy lift going out before voters, that new money will either extend success or fix problems. That is an incumbent record that you either run on or run against. This goes for new funding measures before city council, county government, in Madison, in D.C. But you, as the people who work in the library, need to understand, I think, this is my thesis, that you have a candidacy if we want to use these techniques to make it happen. So if you could advance.
I just have a quick comment about that, John. If this idea of the librarian being the candidate, is this a new concept, and is it something that is hard for us to grasp as you've been helping libraries, I guess?
Well, hit forward, and I will begin with an apology.
Okay.
Okay. It is sort of a new idea.
Okay.
When you get right down to it, the data lines up in a way that says the institution is perceived as, and the individual, the passionate librarian, is perceived as. It's not a frame that we tend to put around things usually. We tend to be focused as a profession and as an industry on the institution, when it is the personhood of you as a professional, you as an engaged member of your community, you as somebody who has that one kid that you want to talk about, or that one group of people that you work with, or that one guy or that one lady that you help do something with. Voters and advocates want to know that you are doing your job. So yes, in many ways it is a new idea, but it goes all the way back to, it goes straight back to anyone who's ever been a candidate for office, because you've got to prove to people that you have an ethical basis and an idea for what the future looks like. We've got a great incumbency as institutions about talking how the library can influence the future of our communities. We, as the people who work here, are the ones who actually do it.
Awesome. And we didn't plan that, by the way. I really wanted to ask that. So that was not rehearsed, everyone.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Are there any other questions coming in from the chat that we need to touch?
I'm not seeing any right now, so I think we're good.
Okay, cool. Are they all in stunned silence, do you think, Jane?
I don't know. I have a hard time. I think they're just intrigued and listening away. So, which isn't a bad thing either.
let's get to our next big question.
Okay.
So we have influence as a candidate. We have influence among voters. We also have influence among advocates. And how do we extend that influence as being the change agent in our community, the transformational actor in our communities, the passionate librarian? How do we extend that influence? If we hit the next slide. We extend our influence by running our advocacy work the same way we run a campaign. What activates individuals who are advocates, and this is where I make the pivot now during the presentation from politics to everyday advocacy, from election day to the other 364 days of the year, what activates advocates? Some things are in our control, some things are not in our control, as individuals or as teams. But this triage, if you will, of ways to think about moving people from simply being, yeah, that's a nice idea, or yeah, I support you guys, to actually doing something. Well, the places that it really lines up are the experience of the issue, which is very similar to the experience of the candidate, and one's prior success as an advocate, which means that somebody has a history of voting. Hit the next slide. They line up really, really very cleanly, in fact.
And some people are saying stunned silence, but in a good way. So.
Oh, good. That's lovely. So on the left-hand column, voters. On the right-hand column, advocates. On the left-hand column, it's election day. On the right-hand column, it's every other day. The reason to vote is an identified need. Vote for me because, vote for this bond measure because this new building will make us a much better community, because we're going to have the resources and the collections, the time, and et cetera, et cetera. We have a way to identify need among our advocates. We have a way to identify need to our advocates. we need a capital campaign. We need $5,000 to do this project. We need a little bit of a lift in our budget to the city council or county government. We need something changed in the law in Madison. That's great. We've done that kind of work all the time. What we don't tend to do is give a personal experience of the issue. We write letters. We might do a day on the Hill, but we don't necessarily expose people to the candidate. This is what we do all the time, or to the issue in that same sort of way. We are modern librarians. We're attempting to bring modern librarianship to our communities. We need funding to do that. We also need to provide ways for them to have incremental success as advocates. So the first time that you ask somebody to call their member of the House or Senate is probably not the first time they're going to call them. The first time here in Illinois, when I was part of a group that was trying to get something done with federal funding, for me to call Senator Dick Durbin's office was terrifying. For me to call Senator Durbin's office, I honestly thought I was going to talk to Senator Durbin. I did not get anywhere near Senator Durbin. But that little bit of success for me to actually make that call means that I'm a better caller next time. I should have backed up about 6 steps. I should have had prior success when it came to first making a pledge to do it, and then being asked to fulfill that with a checkbox on a website, a postcard, a special event where I'm kind of lost in the crowd. But we need to work on ways to move people into that advocacy mode that are focused on the experience. When you say experience of the issue, you can also say personal contact with the people who are working the issue best, which is you guys who work in libraries. Next one, please. The same way, if we have a campaign, we want to run it with a team, and we do certain things that are the best practices. We have opportunities with everyday advocacy in our communities to line up allies and endorsers. And as an industry, as a profession, as a series of institutions around the area, we need to give ourselves an honest look at ourselves and say, have we actually reached out to pre-K providers in a way that asks them to be our allies in this campaign? Have we reached out to job training centers and groups that believe in immigrant rights if we're looking at building up our jobs training area? Have we reached out to the universities that do entrepreneurial support and business development if we're looking to build our business development sections of our library services? Have we lined up? We can do that. We can also build the coalition, and I'm a big believer in coalition. Candidates don't get elected by themselves unless they've got a pile of money. We don't have a pile of money to work with when it comes to our campaigns, so what we need is a big group of bodies. And to build the advocacy coalition for this place where I live and where I work, where it's centered around the library, is either a civic point or a social point, there's a lot of power in that. We do have to look instead at opposition, which is what happens in campaigns, at concerns. What happens if? What happens when? What happens if we don't? That sort of discussion period needs to take place when we're doing advocacy, in the same way that research and decision-making needs to be done when you're a candidate. The place it lines up most closely is the ground game. The idea that if we do not put ourselves out in front of our advocates and our potential allies as somebody that is asking them actively to be involved in the success of this community through the library, if we don't have a ground game that puts us out in front of these other human beings to talk about how we impact lives all across our service area, we're going to be failing. We're going to be continually failing because we don't have a way that says, hi, I'm John, I'm your librarian. Here's what I do for a living. Here's the one kid. Here's the one adult. Here's the groups that we work with. That ground game that is basically knocking on the door of our potential allies and endorsers and then taking that to the people who make the decisions in city or county government, in Madison or D.C. I don't need to talk about this slide anymore. Next one, please. We have a team already in place. Unlike a candidate who's like, hey, I think I'll run for mayor, we already have a team in place. We need to start thinking about ourselves as an advocacy campaign team, though, in a different way. Public employees on public time or representatives of the library can do an awful lot. Your friends group is in the perfect place to be the lobbyists for you guys, the same way the Wisconsin Library Association works in Madison, or the ALA legislative committees, and ALA Day on the Hill works in D.C. To go to government with your representatives is great, but to go there with them as the librarian is better. Staff have a lot of roles to do in terms of building those allies, making those allies into endorsers for your vision for the future, and you occasionally want to send them as well. You might want to go yourself to those meetings. There are occasions when there are friends, and there's occasions when we have super friends. You see a lot of discussion in advocacy seminars, and this is where I depart from some of my colleagues who do advocacy seminars. They talk about not whining, not making little whining statements to elected officials. If you have a super friend who went to high school with the city council member, that's a great friend to have. You want to brief them, of course, but deploying people who are of personal influence to talk to people who are in positions of elected power about your purse strings works. Do not be shy about doing that, in my opinion. Do you want to hit the next one? There's a few things you want to ask, though, before you start sending people off and before you start doing this yourselves. Anyone who you are going to send out, you yourself, your colleagues who are on staff, your friends and volunteers, your super friends, I want you to ask them these 4 questions. And I want you to ask them these 4 questions in a way that is very cooperative in how the answers come together. Because what this does is it sets up your precinct. If you're a candidate, you've got precincts, you've got wards, you've got districts, you've got states that become, they are the jurisdictions that vote for you. This is your precinct here as well. What do you belong to? Where do you live? Who do you know? And then the big question about who are we missing? Because if you're going to be working on an initiative that requires new funding from city government in order to operationalize preschool for all collection support, you need to make sure that you're not missing the home daycare provider, the home child care providers, the fixed site child care providers, the tutors that work from first through middle school. There's a lot of different people that we need to make sure that we're here together. If you could do the next one. I'm going to blow through these a little quickly because you all have the deck. But we're going to talk about the allies and endorsers and the idea that putting you as a library worker or librarian out in front of them in a way that is strategic and conversational about the work that you do, it matters a great deal in the success of things. Next, please. We've got 7, again, we had 7 things that campaigns do. We've got 7 things that advocates do or are affected by in order to become activated. 7s, a bunch of 7s. We could argue about if there's 8 or 6. I don't really care. We've got 7 different groups here that we need to spend time with. And as a supplement to this webinar that we're doing right now, I'm going to ask Ginny to send over an inventory that's a lot more detailed than we have. It talks about within educational partners, let's parse the communities out. For-profit after-school tutors, not-for-profit groups that work on homework help, pre-K providers. In the civic side of things, is it your Kiwanis, your Eagles, your Elks, or is there a much broader group of people? If there is, in the business partners side of things, large employers, how do you behave with them versus small employers, and what messaging do you do to talk to them about what the library does? The library is a transformational force. The library is an educational partner. The library is a gap filler. The library is a business or an idea or an artistic incubator. All of those things are true, and they are more true when you say, and I did that. I do that every day. I bring this myself to that one kid, that one adult, that one group. And we as a library require more funding, more stable funding, different kinds of resources and partnerships that might include you, allies and endorsers, to move this thing forward. And that includes politicians. That includes politicians because, you can leave the slide there, that includes politicians because they all have different reasons that they've run. And the library does so many things for so many people that if you have a politician who ran on veterans' rights or veterans' families, you already serve that. If you have a politician in your community who ran on early childhood, you already do that. If you have a politician who worked on who ran on, pick your issue, you already do that. The person in my opinion, in the campaign, who's the most effective in delivering a message about the transformative power of the library, and the librarian as a transformative agent, is the person who's closest to that individual, to that endorser. What you need to do to run this thing like a campaign is talk it through, do that inventory that was on that earlier page, and figure out who that person is who's closest to, because an ally now or an endorser now becomes a funder later. They become your volunteers. It is a beautiful matrix of support that you guys can build with this kind of approach. Next slide, please. One way to do that is to work on identifying some community leaders. These are 5 quick questions you can ask them. The big question here on slide number, 32, when you get this back at home or back in your office and you're going to go through this again, the big question you want to flag on slide 32 is number 3. Who does the library serve? And number 4, why is the library important to those people? If you take the survey yourself and you write down everybody, I'm going to give you a check minus. I will give you a check plus if you start enumerating different communities. And so you should too, to individuals who are leaders in your community or leaders in your library or leaders among your volunteers, if they can start enumerating that. If they can't, we can help them along. Because what does new funding do to serve those communities is absolutely germane to why we're going out and asking, either for new funding or new authority or new relationships. Okay, next please. This section here, like I said before, we're going to talk about just a few high-level things to help spark your imagination and creativity. And I also want you to see yourself in this when I say the library as, which means that I do this. And I can tell you a story about how I do this. Or let me bring my colleague over who can tell you even a better story. Next slide, please. Because library use does not matter when you're telling these stories, you've got to keep 2 frames in mind. This is boilerplate advocacy training 101 stuff, because to somebody who's a user, you begin your sentences with, as you know. As you know, this room is filled with kids from 3:01 p.m. until 6:30. We're doing homework help like crazy. As you know, the library is a little short right now when it comes to the collections for XYZ group. As you know, we are doing more with less all the time. To somebody who's in the library, whether they know that or not, it means that they're part of our group, they're part of our tribe, you know. To the non-user, somebody who's not been to the library since they were 14, who might be 54, 84, 24 years old, but still understands that the library is that transformational force in their community, who has a belief in the library, you say to them, as you can imagine. You know, as you can imagine, this library gets a ton of, people looking for work. As you can imagine, this library is the only point in the community, or the only place in the community where people can get free access to the internet, which means that they can actually apply for jobs and build skills. As you can imagine, with the budget cuts, the sequestration, the issues with funding in Madison, the issues with taxes locally, as you can imagine, things are a little bit tight. But what you can do is help us find some value for somebody other than you. I understand that you don't use it, that's cool, but there's a lot of people out there who need it. And there's a satisfaction to them helping move this ball forward for the community that if they don't have, they're not going to be your advocates anyway. Next one, please. So, like I said before, when I say the library as, how do you fit yourself into this? The library is an educational partner. Summer reading. I do summer reading all the time. Summer reading as a gap filler. Summer reading as a way to extend, prevent the fallback of kids at reading level. The library is a social leveler. Well, we serve all the time without fear or favor. We'll get you what you want. And good thing that we've got enough funding for interlibrary loan, or maybe we don't. The place of discovery, which could be about the arts, it could be about identity, it could be about educational attainment, it could be about ourselves as a community. Well, the library as these different things is all about it being a transformational force, which I've said about 50 times, but also you guys as the transformational agents. Next one, please. The library is an incubator. This way of phrasing it I personally love, which is why I put it on my slides. The idea that we incubate ideas, that we help them hatch. Those ideas might be in businesses. It might be somebody who's looking to start up a new app company who wants to come in and do business reference with you guys, or needs some help doing supply chain management or supply chain research or patent and trademark. Have we helped them incubate it? Yeah, because we've bought into we bought into helping them years ago when we first decided to come work at the library. We can incubate the arts. We do that all the time. We've got some great stories about that. We also incubate community identity as an anchor institution in our community. We are a leverage point as well. And the librarians and the people who work here are the leveragers. If you get that whole idea of like, if I have a long enough lever and a place to stand, I can move the world. What do we do as a retail anchor to help leverage other things in town? The businesses that we show off, the opportunity to just get people out of their houses and then they go shopping, The grants and other capacity work that we do, if we can do that with partners who are potential allies and endorsers. We got a grant to do pre-K. We got a grant to do databases that also work with the schools, telling that story, not just about the library, but about you guys who work there as the ones who figured that out or said yes to the idea. Next slide, please. Because nothing impacts voter behavior more than their perception of the librarian and the library as an institution. The voter behavior matters a great deal because it will manifest itself as constituents of elected officials, and that their perception of you as the librarian and the library as an institution shall not be morbid to them as a 14-year-old any longer, if we can get ourselves out in front of them like the candidate. The idea that if they've not been there since they were 14, you have no idea what a modern library looks like, what a modern library collects, what the change is in format from paper to e, the difference between what's on the open web and what's in the hidden web in our proprietary database. They have no idea, and they certainly have not met somebody as cool as you all are doing the kind of work that you're doing that is radically interesting at a cocktail party. Let's go out to the cocktail parties. Let's go meet some more people so they have a perception of the librarian. Next, please. Your own story matters. Why you work at the library matters. Your own biography of how you got there matters in a way that I would not be shy about. That one kid that I work with, that one adult that I work with, that one group that I work with, that one liaison relationship that I work with, the one thing I do all day long that might seem boring and pedantic because I do it all day long, it might not necessarily be fascinating, but it is transformational to the person who's hearing about it. I want to challenge you and ask you what your best story is about helping the individual or community change. That's something that you're going to have for homework today. What is your best story? If you could put that top of mind, not every time that you're talking to a funder, not every time you're talking to a potential ally, not every time you're talking to an elected official will that story come up, but I guarantee it, you're going to thank me someday because you're going to have it in your hip pocket. Next slide, please. I am the librarian who does these things at this place that people believe in still, thank goodness. I've helped somebody do these things. The story about when somebody comes in and says, I need a book on grief for my kid because their grandma has just died, and that happens to be my mom, we all have those stories. The person who has been looking for some resource, we have that story. Bring them to mind, because that is actually the story that a funder, an advocate, an ally, an elected needs to hear. Okay, next slide, please. I'm going to give you guys some really quick things that you can do starting tomorrow as your homework. A couple of 3s instead of a couple of 7s like before. Go ahead. Get out of the library. Get out of the library. If you need an excuse to get out of the library, I'm going to give you a couple. You guys do community surveys all the time. You do needs assessment surveys all the time. If we're relying on 50 people to take a web survey about our library and we're thrilled that 50 people took it, go out and knock on 50 more doors. You know? Go out and take it to 5 or 10 more groups where there's going to be 10 or 5 people at them. I want to see you out of the library talking about how this goes. The programs and events that you do, don't be shy. Don't be shy. Right now, there are so many instances where the library and the librarians act as, and I'm not saying this in a negative way, but it's simply true, as the butler. We'll put out the cookies, we'll open the door, but we will never mention to the people who are participating in that program or event that we've either convened or that we're hosting, that there's a situation going on with county government, city government in Madison with the Board of Trustees that needs to be addressed about funding that keeps those doors open and those cookies on the table, or that keeps those doors open and the service delivery point happening. Don't just be the host. Be the convener. The other thing, by the way, if nothing else, social media right now. When you are doing social media in an everyday advocacy perspective, I'm going to ask you to not just post that there is a 3 o'clock story time at the branch. I would rather see that you post a picture of Karen, who's doing the story time, along with something that says Miss Karen is doing story time with this group, and they're going to be doing this kind of wonderful stuff, and Miss Karen's going to sing with them. Something that humanizes it in social media acts as a simulacrum for that personal contact. And it also helps reinforce the fact that there are human beings who work at the library. So that even those people who just come in for a quick service point, grab the book and run, have a reinforcement that you guys are the ones who are doing this work. I think it's extremely important. Next slide, please. Using community surveys, I think, is a great way to do it. If you have a strategic planning survey, you're coming up to a plan, you're evaluating a plan, you've got an assessment that needs to go on, try it door to door. Try it at special events. Don't just wait for the inbound, because those people who do not use the library, those people who have not been to the library, who still believe in it as a public good, want to hear from you and honestly, they want to know that the things are still going well, but they also haven't been told because they haven't come in. You have to leave. It's going to be not super easy at certain points, but you have to leave. And we've got some great tips on the Every Library blog and on the Every Library Facebook page about how to do that. Next, please. When you are doing programming that's aligned towards your allies and endorsers, or that exposes staff to new people, or that encourage civic engagement, you will be more successful. The fact that you have taken the time to build a new alliance with or a coalition for a particular group in your community, and you're not doing programming around that, that is a bit of dysphasia that I would encourage you to overcome. Next one, please. Here's a couple things that might get you out of the building in a way that is okay with the city policies or the library's policies. What does a new resident visit look like? What does a new resident visit look like, just to break the seal of getting out of the building? Hi, here's the same way that many of us perhaps have the book of the books for babies that the hospital gives out. I'm not suggesting that you go to the maternity ward also along with that, but if you can go and say hi to somebody who's new to the community, what does that really mean? Hi, I'm John. I'm your librarian. To embed librarians with those key allies at different points, whether it's jobs creation, K-12, big employers. How do we do reference in a different place? That also might be like in Chicago we do it at the Jewel, in the vestibule. Set up the OPAC, do a pickup point, do some reference there. Unusual spots for us to be in to show people that we exist. This is what we look like. This is who we are, and this is what we do every day. You should come to the library too. It's kind of fun. The biggest thing you could do, and the place I'm going to end this, is on Library Card Sign-Up Month. If we could do, as a community across this country, library card sign-up in a little bit of a different way, if we could do it in a way that goes and knocks on their door and says, hi, I'm John, I'm your librarian, do you need us? Do you need a library card? And I don't need two forms of identification because I'm standing at your door. Here's what the library's up to. Here's what here's where we're at. We want to meet you guys at your home. We're going to mail it to you. Don't worry, I don't have it on me right now. We're going to mail you the library card. But here's how we get started with a relationship with you. And I'm here to be that person that you need in this community to obviate barriers, to obviate distances, to fill in some gaps. Here's what we do as a library, but here's who I am as your librarian. Library Card Sign-Up Month would be the most amazing thing that we could possibly do to put librarians out in front of voters and advocates. I think it would change the world dramatically. The next few slides are all what you can do starting tomorrow stuff. If you want to just touch on them real quick, I've got some homework for this crew. If you want to just, I've got some advice about techniques, and you're going to come back into the slide deck and look at them. Next one. You've got a specific thing to do in threes. The next 3 days, the next 3 weeks, the next 3 months and what I want you to see, or what I want to see from you in the next 3 years. These are definitely candidate-focused, and they are definitely designed to get you out. And I think that might be it. I'm a little off on my, yeah, there we go.
It is.
So
it is.
I'm hopeful that this was useful to you. If you are interested in what we're doing as every library more broadly around the country, Ginny, can you post that? I can't see it. I don't know if you have it yet or not.
Yes.
Post that link at some point.
Yes.
We're very interested in and hopeful for the success of every single library in this country. The reason we called it Every Library is that any library ballot measure matters to every library everywhere. And we're in this together, folks. So if you want some further discussion about some of these things we've talked about, here's my contact info. I'm really available to you to do this. And I really appreciate Nicolet for sponsoring this opportunity today. I'm open, and I'll hang around for questions for a little while.
Awesome. So as you see, I posted the Every Library site in your chat box. They also have a Facebook page, facebook.com/everylibrary. And the other links that you gave me, John, I'll post in the follow-up emails. As John said, the slides will be shared with you and the recording in your follow-up email from GoToWebinar. So you should be getting that tomorrow, hopefully. One question did come, a couple questions came through, and I want to get to these quickly. Steve says, one of the issues that we face is levy limits. How would we address this issue in an effective way?
That levy limit issue needs to be addressed either legislatively or with ordinance. You have a hard time getting around them because they are built in and baked in. That's a broader advocacy discussion for Wisconsin Library Association and some other groups that are in common cause on the levy caps. We just saw in Arizona about 2 weeks ago a bill being advanced that would cap libraries in the same way that municipalities and other units of government are. And it's really coming from, honestly, coming from the Goldwater Institute and other Tea Party groups in Arizona that are trying to put those kind of caps on spending. It is a more significant problem than any one library can handle, which is why I'm suggesting that it needs to be talked about at a state level, because that's where it's going to have to be effective. It's either through legislative fixes or through regulatory fixes.
Okay. John, you talked about the concept of the best story, or what is your library's best story, and kind of working on that. How important would you say it is to have prepared what that elevator speech, whether it's 30 seconds, 1 minute, 5 minutes? We had a speaker a few years ago, Gail Santee, who works for the Central Kansas Library System, and she really emphasized having that elevator speech ready. So when you run into one of your legislators or someone on city council in the grocery store or at the school play, and they say, hey, hey Gail, how's everything at the library? That you don't just say fine, or you should never answer fine or good. You'd say, well,
right.
John, let me tell you, or let me tell you what we're,
right.
So.
Right. How important is the elevator speech? When you're in a campaign, if you're in a capital campaign, if you're in a advocacy campaign about a particular ordinance or piece of legislation, if you're in a particular funding posture because of the time of the year, yeah, get your elevator speech down. I'm not looking to necessarily teach that as much as to humanize it.
Okay.
We've got 3 talking points. We're going to hit our 3 talking points, and I'm going to tell you a little story about the kid, the adult, the group, the moment of change that I have participated in or my colleague has participated in. Yeah, we need to be sure that we're all on message about the particulars of the campaign.
Sure.
But the overarching theme is how I did this.
What would you
say? How I can do it better with more resources.
What would you say is the biggest mistakes we're making? You talked a little bit about this, but the biggest mistakes we're making, or what are the biggest advantages that the biggest things we're not taking advantage of right now?
Well, I'm going to say that it is the librarian as brand.
Okay.
Library branding discussions have ranged from, gosh, I wish we could call it something other than library, to why does the public just think it's about books?
Right.
We've got an amazing brand. I don't know if I know who a zookeeper is, but I'm not entirely sure, what they do. I know what the coolest forensic accountant I ever met at a cocktail party turned my whole image of forensic accounting around. The librarian as a brand the person who, the modern librarian as a brand, the update, the reboot, the this is me, that's the biggest thing that we're leaving on the table right now because we're librarian, you know? So I would suggest that we need to start talking about ourselves in a way that says this is what I look like, this is what I believe, this is why I work there, and this is who I've touched.
Excellent. I just want to read a few comments that came through. Jenny said that she definitely agrees that effective advocacy takes practice, lots and lots of practice. Irma said this was a great presentation, lots to think about. And then Steve shared one of his stories, or he just mentioned one of their best stories at his library is, the lady with social phobia who thanked them for making a place where she feels comfortable. Now she can actually leave the house to visit the library. And I'm sure there's many other stories out there like that.
Yeah. My favorite story. I don't work in a library. I'm not a librarian. I don't have a degree. I've been president of my board here in Berwyn for a long time. I used to work at the American Library Association as a membership director. So I don't have the in-person stories. So when I talk about it, I talk about Christian Zabriskie sometimes. Christian Zabriskie runs Urban Librarians Unite out of Brooklyn and Queens. They've clawed back from the Bloomberg administration over the last couple of years about $500 million in funding for those three systems that they're part of through Urban Librarians Unite. And Christian tells a story about if it's 10:30 in the morning Eastern Time, he's already helped two guys write their first resume ever. And the reason that he's helping them is because there's a halfway house down the street in Rockaway. I mean, this is not the most pleasant neighborhood to hang out in. There's a halfway house, and if they don't write a resume that day, they don't get their benefits to go back to jail. This is not just writing a resume. This is also okay. Let's look at where we get job listings.
Right.
Let's talk through this. Let's humanize it. That takes a lot of time, and that takes a lot of resources for the library to support that kind of work. But it is massively changing for that community to have Kristen there doing that.
That's amazing. Well, John, thank you so much for talking with us today. Thank you, all of you who listened in. I think we did have a lot of stunned silence, but again, it was in a good way because you provided so much information. And we just had our legislative day in Madison, actually, a week ago.
Great.
So this is all very much on our minds and fresh for all of us. So again,
that's perfect. Good.
Yeah.
So when you do your follow-up to your legislators, tell them a story. Because we all have follow-up that we need to do now. If it's been a week, and I know that many of us have not done it yet,
sure.
Let's tell a story. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, John. Thank you all for listening in. Have a great day and a great rest of your week.